All right, today we're jumping into one of the shortest and most personal letters you'll ever find from the ancient world. Seriously, it's a tiny note sent from a Roman prison almost 2,000 years ago. You could easily flip right past it, but inside, there's a fascinating puzzle just waiting to be solved.
So at its core, this letter is just a simple request about a guy named Onesimus. But for centuries, thinkers like the great logician William Paley looked at this and saw something much bigger, a brilliant piece of evidence. The real question is, evidence of what?
So let's meet our cast of characters. The writer is the Apostle Paul, and he's in prison. He's writing to his buddy Philemon, and the whole letter is about Onesimus, who was Philemon's slave, ran away, and then met Paul in prison and became a Christian. Now, Paul's sending Onesimus back, but he's making it clear. He's not coming back as property, but as a brother.
Okay, this is where our investigation really kicks off. How do we know this incredibly personal, kind of convenient letter is actually real? Could it be a forgery, something cooked up later to make Paul look good? Well, William Paley argued that the letter is packed with these subtle clues. He called them undesigned coincidences that no forger would ever think to put in. So, let's put on our detective hats and take a look at the evidence.
Our first clue is all about location, a sort of geographical puzzle. And to solve it, we've got to find these hidden links between two totally separate documents.
So here's the first problem we run into. Paul's letter to Philemon, it's super personal, but it never says where Philemon lives. No city, no region, nothing. I mean, he could be anywhere from Rome to Jerusalem. A forger would probably just make up a location to make it seem legit. But here, there's just a blank. Or is there?
Well, the whole mystery starts to unravel when you pull in another one of Paul's letters, the one he wrote to the church in Colossae. See, the Philemon letter mentions his servant, Onesimus, and a guy named Archippus who was with him. But then, over in the letter to the Colossians, Paul says that Onesimus is one of you, and that Archippus is a minister in their church. And just like that, the dots connect.
And this is Paley's logic in action. It's beautiful, right? The only way we figure out where Philemon lives is by piecing together these scattered details from two different documents. A forger would have just said, to Philemon of Colossae. They would never create this roundabout, almost accidental trail of breadcrumbs for us to follow.
And that's really the key here. The fact that the evidence is so indirect is exactly what makes it so convincing. It doesn't look like it was designed to be found, which makes it feel real. For Paley, this was a massive sign of authenticity. Okay, let's move on to the next piece of evidence. We're shifting from geography to people. And we're going to see how the network of friends and the specific situation described in the letter builds the case even stronger.
Right. So in the letter to Philemon, the author, Paul, keeps calling himself a prisoner. That's a pretty major claim. If it's true, you'd expect to see some hints of it in his other letters written around that same period.
And guess what? That's exactly what we find. When you look across three separate letters, this really consistent picture starts to form. Paul's in jail, but he's optimistic he's getting out soon. It's this subtle harmony of circumstances that would be incredibly difficult for a forger to get just right.
This brings us to our third clue, and honestly, this one's my favorite. At the end of both Philemon and Colossians, Paul lists some friends who are with him and says they send their greetings. Now, if you were a forger trying to make these letters look connected, you'd just copy the list of names perfectly from one to the other, right? You'd want total consistency.
But when you look closely, the lists are almost identical, except for one tiny, kind of bizarre difference. In Colossians, it says Aristarchus is his fellow prisoner, but in Philemon, that title suddenly switches to Epaphras. I mean, why would a forger invent such a specific, subtle inconsistency? It makes no sense. Paley's insight here is just genius. He says this isn't a mistake, it's a sign of truth. A forger would never dream up a subtle contradiction like this. But in real life, things change. Paley suggests that maybe fellow prisoner was a temporary designation that just happened to shift from one guy to the other in the time between writing these two letters. It's a detail too weird for a forger, but it fits perfectly with the messiness of reality.
Okay, on to our final piece of evidence, and this is the one Paley considered the smoking gun. We've looked at the external facts, now we're going to look inside the writing itself, at the author's unique voice.
So, could a forger really capture the unique personality of the Apostle Paul? Paley argues that this letter to Philemon has this very specific blend of authority and tenderness that is just recognizably, authentically Paul.
So first, you get this really powerful, authoritative tone.
Paul reminds Philemon, hey, I'm an apostle. He's not just a friend asking a favor. He has the authority to command him, to enjoin him to do what's right.
But then, in the very next breath, he does a complete 180. He sets his authority aside and appeals on purely personal grounds. He appeals to their friendship, to love's sake, to the fact that he's an old man, and to their shared struggle as he sits there in chains. The command melts away and becomes a heartfelt plea.
And this wasn't a one-off thing. This mix of apostolic confidence and deep personal affection is Paul's signature style. You see it all over his other letters. A forger might be able to imitate one tone or the other, but weaving them together so naturally, Paley was convinced that was the mark of the real man.
So we've looked at all the clues. The geography, the people, that subtle little contradiction, and the author's voice. So what's the final verdict? Is this letter an authentic plea from a real prisoner?
When you lay it all out, the case is pretty compelling. Each piece of evidence by itself is pretty subtle, but when you take them all together, they create this web of coincidences that points powerfully toward one conclusion. The letter's the real deal.
And this gets to the absolute heart of Paley's whole argument. A forger works with the obvious. They make the connections plain and simple. But the evidence for Philemon is the exact opposite. It's messy, it's complex, and it's hidden just under the surface. A lot like real life.
And here it is, in Paley's own words. He bet his whole argument on this idea. When you're trying to spot a fake, it's not the big, obvious agreements that prove anything. It's the small, roundabout, and subtle coincidences that act as the unmistakable fingerprints of truth. And that's really the question Paley leaves us with. If this letter wasn't born from a real prisoner, a real slave in a real, messy set of circumstances, then how in the world do you explain this intricate web of interlocking details? Where could such a complex and subtle tapestry of evidence possibly come from, if not from the truth?